Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books. Today I'd like to do a dedicated review to Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So this was a book that I guess a lot of people read in school, but I was never assigned this particular book. I think I might have been assigned some of her poetry, but I was never assigned the actual book, and so I had never picked it up. And then my friend, who is a French historian as well and lives in Seoul, South Korea, suggested that we buddy read this book together. She had tried to read it in the past and had felt that it was quite difficult to get through, and so we thought that reading it together would make it a little bit easier to read. And sure enough, it is a very difficult and heartbreaking book to read. There are parts that just shattered me, and yet the writing was beautiful and like deceivingly simple, because it reads very simply, right? But there's a complexity there that just it's just beautiful. I think my friend actually was better articulating that part. Like, she was paying attention to the way that Maya Angelou forms her sentence and how she very clearly pays attention to every word and the function of every word in the sentence. At the same time, you're not like often having to look things up or anything like that. It's simply written, and it it's deceivingly simple in that way, because there's a lot of thought and complexity that goes into it, but the end result is that you focus on the content, and you focus on what Angelou wants you to focus on. So I thought I would talk about some of the main themes that that came out during my reading of it. Obviously, these are not a complete set of themes from the book or anything like that. This is just kind of the things that I wanted to pull out and talk about here. So the first is that of racism. That is one of the main themes, because Maya Angelou, we're following a young black girl in the American South, in St. Louis, and then in San Francisco, and so she's encountering racism pretty much in every place, but specifically in the South. She's growing up in the small town of Stamps, Arkansas. She is living with her grandmother, her uncle, and her brother, who's just a couple of years older than her. And so you know that the racism is going to come up, small town Arkansas, and sure enough, it's there, and it's kind of in the background in a lot of the actions that are taken, even in like the good moments for Maya Angelou and for the community in the small town in which she's part of. The moments of happiness are embraced in a way that, like, you only embrace when you also know the heartbreak and cruelty of the kind of racism that existed and continues to exist in the United States. It's also like, it was really difficult to read at times, because you also realize how, it's one thing to acknowledge racism as a concept, as a thing that happened, even as a thing that happens, but it's quite another thing to really see the impact it has on people, people you care about. And that's something that, for a lot of us who are not white, it like hits you in the face in the most unexpected way sometimes. And in the story that Maya Angelou tells about her own life, it's at moments not really unexpected. Like, she sets up certain scenes in which you kind of guess what's going to happen, because you know the history, you know what the racial setting, and sure enough, it happens, and it's just like, it doesn't make it any less heartbreaking to me, because you see the emotional, the physical, just the complete effect it has on people, and that really hit me And because I was reading this book at the same time as I was following the end of the Derek Chauvin trial for the murder of George Floyd, it was just that much more heartbreaking because you realize how little a lot of things have changed. So how little they have changed. And it's just another layer of heartbreak. Another key theme in the story is that of religion. Maya Angelou's, Margaret is her name. Her grandmother was very religious to a fault. And there are moments in which religion does take, like, it can be liberating for the Black community in Arkansas. But for a young Black girl, it was also quite oppressive at times, very limiting. And so you see kind of how that affects everyone, but how, especially the gender differences, and how, like, Maya Angelou's brother feels it, and then how it plays out for her in particular. Another main theme there is that of childhood. And, because you're seeing everything happen through the eyes of a child who is not fully a child, because she has to think about, the racist white mob potentially killing her disabled uncle, or killing her grandmother, or white kids exerting their racial power over her strong grandmother. And it's just, there's a part of that racism that takes away, the full experience of being a child. Like, children shouldn't have to be worried about that, and yet they are. It still happens in this world, and very heartbreaking. But you also see the way that childhood is denied for a young Black woman because of sexual abuse, and the confusion for a child to experience sexual abuse when she doesn't even know what sex is, and she's just craves love and physical touch from the people around her, and it creates something really confusing for her. And that there are chapters in here in which you see, depictions of pedophilia, sexual and emotional abuse, and those were the hardest to read. And they're beautifully written, in that you see everything through like a 7 and 8 year old's mind, and just really powerful, hard to read scenes. Another of the key themes here is that of absent parents. Marguerite is raised primarily by her grandmother, up to a point after she graduates from what seems like the equivalent of like middle school. It becomes very clear that for her grandmother, I think, that they cannot stay, that the children cannot stay, that living in rural Arkansas is not the ideal place, especially when their parents are in California and should be the ones taking care of their children. And although California is not a racism-free place, at least the parents are there, and at least there's a little bit more opportunity. Though I have to say, I really appreciated that Maya Angelou does not create a kind of fantastical idea of like St. Louis or of California, even of San Francisco, because as somebody who lives in California, I can tell you that there are things that are quite overt and things that are much more subtle, but make life very difficult for non-white people. And here, and I appreciated that in Maya Angelou's description There's a kind of balance and just very real feeling for especially California, and the relationship between her and her parents, who didn't raise her, are not used to having kids around, and all of a sudden they are forced to take care of their children, and that has a lot of negative effects, but some positives as well. I was just mostly like just struck by my Angelou story. I was like, what? What do you mean? I had to keep reminding myself towards the end of the book that like she becomes Maya Angelou, a like a famous poet, and I was like, okay, I know things are gonna work out for her, but my goodness, what the things she had to go through. I'm also really intrigued by the people in her life. Like, I want to know what became of her parents, what became of her brother. And I know she's written other autobiographical books, so I will eventually get to them because I'm just so intrigued by this woman's life. Like, just an amazing life that really tells you American history. Like, if you really want to understand American history in the 30s and 40s through the experience of a young black girl, like, you don't need the history books. Like, you need Maya Angelou here. Like, you get to see how the Depression initially doesn't hit rural black communities. Like, if you've got nothing, there's not a whole lot that can be taken away from you at that point. But eventually it does hit them. How World War II hits the black community in San Francisco. How the internment of Japanese Americans in California affects the black community. And all of that is told so subtly and beautifully. Like, this is what like living history is, and like the reason why I like history is because you get to see how it affects people's lives in an everyday capacity. And so I just found that really powerful, and my friend and I just had several conversations in which she's the one who said, you don't need the history books, you just read this. Why are people reading all these anti-racist books, all these other things? Like, you need to read and listen to other people's experiences, and I think that that is a key element of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. What is the meaning of the title? I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I could give you some intellectual answers to that, but I think the beauty of that title is also that, like, the true answer is sitting right there. It's sitting right there, just out of reach. Like, to fully understand this, I think I would have to live through her experience, and I can't quite do that. I can read, I can empathize, I can sympathize, I can go on the journey she takes me on in her autobiography, but also I am not a young black girl living in the 30s and the 40s in rural Arkansas, and then in St. Louis, and in San Francisco. And so I don't fully reach the meaning of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. But it's just right there, right? Like, it's just right there for me. And I just really enjoyed reading this book with all its heartbreak and everything. And I think it is very much worth picking up if it's been on your list. If it hasn't, it's worth taking a look, putting it on your radar, and adding it to your TBR, because I always say with books that are like, that I loved, that I can't guarantee that you will love it as much as I loved it, but I can guarantee that you will like it. This is a good book, an extremely good book, especially if you go in knowing what you're going to get, right? If you go in prepared for the racism, the sexual and emotional abuse, the pedophilia, like those are very difficult topics, and if you can handle them, I think this book is worth it. So if you have read it, please let me know down below. If there are themes you would like to add to the list, please include them in a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.